Today we are interviewing Mark E Estes, who has held the position of Director of the Bernard E. Whitkin Alameda County Law Library in California since December 2008. Prior to that, Mark worked for about 28 years as librarian for the Denver law firm of Home Roberts and Owen, LLP. Many viewers of this interview will probably recognize Mark as the editorial director of AALL Spectrum. Mark, let's begin with a little personal history. Could you tell us a little bit about your life, both when you were young and today?
Sure. I was born in Topeka, Kansas, and went through junior high school there. When I was about to start high school, we moved to Arkadelphia, Arkansas, because my father got a job teaching French at Ouachita Baptist University. I can trace some of my interests that played out later from junior high school, where I was on the committee that drafted our Constitution and bylaws for the Student Council in our new junior high school. I played football in junior high and college, lettered in both places, captained the football team my senior year in high school. And ironically enough, you're doing this interview 3 days after my 45th high school reunion. So I've been reflecting more on what those times were as well as where we are now. Now, I can go into much more detail about my earlier life if you'd like.
Well, it's sort of your interview. I got mine a while back. And
Well, in junior high school, it was when skateboards first became popular. Back then, skateboards had very hard wheels. They weren't very forgiving. And a friend of mine and I snuck out at night to go about a mile and a half away to another neighborhood near the Kansas governor's mansion. We went there because it had hills. We didn't have any hills right where I was. And we went skateboarding for a while without crashing, surprisingly enough. In high school, I was the outsider in more ways than I realized, except that I had a high grade point but wasn't selected for National Honor Society because I was selected by the teachers. But I was an outsider. I was from Kansas. Yet my classmates accepted me. The football team certainly. So much so that they were willing to elect the girl I was dating at homecoming time, who was a junior, to be the homecoming queen because they just wanted to honor their captain. I didn't let them do that because the tradition required it to be a senior. After high school, I hoped to play football, but the coach at Ottawa University in Ottawa, Kansas, didn't find me quite large enough, and I wasn't. My biggest disappointment from high school or growing up really was that I didn't grow like my uncle, who grew 3 inches after high school. So I did not get 6 feet high, as I'd hoped, with some hopes of becoming a professional football player. So in college, at Ottawa University, and then after that, we took a year off from school because that seemed to be the thing to do in 1972. By that time, I'd started bicycling more again and ended up leading a cross-country bicycle ride, a fundraiser from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. It was sponsored by ESA, a women's service organization, to raise funds for St. James Children's Hospital. Exciting bit about that was that we met Marlo Thomas at the front end, Danny Thomas, and Dinah Shore at the other end. We were on the Dinah Shore show. So that gave me a good base for the next year when I started racing bicycles. Took a year off and went to law school. Found out I was doing fairly well racing bicycles and decided to try and make the Olympics team. The first selection race was in Bisbee, Arizona in 1976. I crashed going across some railroad tracks, landed on my face, took 60 stitches around my left eye, and missed a month of training. A month later, I was in California, had a crash sliding out around a turn. 3 weeks later, back in California, this time around the East Bay. We climb up a large hill. I stayed with the group just fine. But as we started down the other side, it was steep and fast, and all of a sudden I was imagining myself sliding across the road and off the edge. I sat up, put the brakes on, and dropped out of the race. And dropped out of my efforts to make the Olympic team. But 20 years later, I got to be in the Olympics when my wife was the competition manager for the Olympics in Atlanta for cycling. I got to ride a motorcycle in those games. So as you can see, I had this connection with athletics, first with contact sport, and then to something that was just fast.
But a bit of a contact sport too on occasion.
There is some contact in the peloton, it's true, it's true. It's just not generally the same sort of head-on things that football is.
No.
After trying to make the Olympics, this made fall of, or late summer of '76, I was looking at about a quarter and a half, no, I'm sorry, not even a quarter's worth of credits to graduate law school. And I wasn't ready for the real world. So I was looking around for ways to avoid the real world. Because I'd been Al Coco's research assistant, actually he hired me as his secretary for the 4 years in law school, and I saw what he'd been doing. I said, this looks pretty good. And conveniently enough, he had just started a joint degree program that offered a graduate teaching assistant position, which gave tuition waiver and a stipend. I wasn't guaranteed for the position, but there were only 2 people in the position at that time. One was graduating in December, and no one else was in the queue. So it was like I was guaranteed. So I applied, got accepted. Came December, January, I got the job, and it kept me out for another year. It was wonderful. Loved it. Now,
So at that point in time, you had graduated from college, and now you were studying in the law school at the University of Denver, where Al was the director at that time.
correct.
Now I could, if you and I had known each other, and you'd come to me and said, Pat, Al Coco's just offered me the position of his secretary, I would have had to caution you, because I was his assistant at the University of Houston some years earlier, and I remember when he fired his secretary one day.
But you see, for me, it was a perfect job.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to change clothes to go work in a law office. I could ride my bicycle to the school, stay there, and it was right there. It was easy.
Yeah.
And turned out that I sort of morphed into being his research assistant. After I was in second year, I began grading some of his legal bib papers. And then when the law program, the library program started, I actually helped with the legal bib classes. I don't know that I actually taught it. Now that sort of class, my cohort of the library school, the law library school, had many members who've been on the executive board. Claire Germain, Claire Engel, Margie Mays, Jean Willis has not been on the executive board, and others who I'm forgetting, some who were in the law school, library school before that, of course. But that was Al, and one of the things that are most noteworthy about Al that got me excited about, or taught me some things, was his role as chair of the placement committee. He chose that as a way to meet lots of people, and he did meet lots of people. Now, I skipped over why I went to law school.
Yeah. Well, I assume Coco had a big influence in why you decided to become a law librarian.
The law librarian.
But how was it? Yeah, he wasn't in your life yet.
No, he wasn't.
You decided to go to law school.
Law school was something that happened in junior high or grade school. Somebody said, Mark, what do you want to be when you grow up? President? I said, oh, hey, that sounds good. So I looked around. Back then, even then being studious and methodical, I researched and saw that most presidents are lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
Most lawyers have to go to law school. So I set forth to go to law school. And that was the plan. And never really wavered from that. But yet never really wanted or intended to practice law. It was just something that I was supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So watching Al work at the law school at the University of Denver, and Sue Weinstein, who was his assistant, I guess, really head of the reference library, I really enjoyed what they were doing. I always had liked knowing how to find things and sharing that knowledge with others.
Mm-hmm.
So, combined with an opportunity to stay out of the real world for another year, it was perfect. It was perfect.
Well, you went on, graduated from the program, and then went on with the law firm in Denver.
Well, first
Yeah,
though,
how did that all?
first
go?
I had the dream job for a dual degree person. I got a job at a law school, still a new law school that was trying to get ABA approval.
All right.
University of Laverne in Laverne, California.
In California, yeah.
I was recruited, well actually I applied, and I got the job offer finally when I was visiting my parents over Christmas. But we moved to California to bring that law school up to ABA standards.
Mm-hmm.
To do that, I negotiated contracts with vendors, used some used book dealers to buy books, large collections of books, big runs of regional reporters.
Oh, you needed all that when
We
the
needed all
ABA
that.
inspector showed up.
So we got all the books. We rearranged the collection a bit. We were teaching, the whole faculty was teaching good classes. But at that time, the ABA had been burned by a couple of law schools folding financially.
Mm-hmm.
And unbeknownst to us, we should have known it, certainly in retrospect, the university, our parent, wasn't in good financial shape. And so the ABA was concerned that because we were tuition dependent, of course you're tuition dependent when you're brand new starting, nobody's going to give you money, and you're not going to give you money because you're not able to
You
pay.
know, a lot of schools long after that era.
Yeah, so we actually tried twice, and after the second time, it became clear that they had changed the rules without actually publishing the rule change. And the new rule was that you had to be financially stable. So the faculty voted to recommend to the trustees that they stop seeking ABA approval. The trustees agreed, and the faculty all started looking for jobs elsewhere. Certainly all of us who had moved to California.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was December 1979. We'd driven back to Colorado to visit over the holidays, because my wife still had family and friends there. On the way back, our car broke down in Flagstaff, Arizona. And in the process of waiting for the part for this little Fiat to reach Flagstaff, I realized that there was still a position vacant in Colorado. Actually, one of my classmates, Linda Calloway, was the librarian at Home Robertson Owen, and she was trying to find a successor so that she could move east to be with her husband. She was in law school, but she wasn't going to move until she had a successor. I got back to Laverne. I called Linda to see if the position was still open. She said it was. She said, "You're practically assured the position." She set up the interview, the call. I interviewed on early February, got the position, and we moved in February 15th. So I started at Home Robertson Owen in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
At HRO, as we shortened it, finally after many years. I took the library from providing services to 75 attorneys and 2 offices to 225 attorneys in 6 offices.
Mm-hmm.
I designed to remodel the library. I designed a new library. I expanded the collection from about 6,000 volumes to 75,000 volume equivalents. Then As times changed, as the firm needed to use the library space, because we had great library space on the 44th floor of the Wells Fargo, now the Wells Fargo Tower, with views to the west and to the north, carrels that were 5 feet long in the window bays. So it was great scenery, wonderful wood shelves. But the firm wanted more lawyer offices. I got ahead of them. Rather than allowing somebody else to dictate how to remodel the library, I proposed a remodel that made the library more functional and still kept its beauty and uniqueness. So I shrank the library from 75,000 to less than 10,000 volume equivalents, using compact shelving and, of course, our electronic databases. But that was just the traditional library side of stuff. I also was paying attention to how the world was changing. I registered HRO.com as the firm's domain name before anybody else thought about doing that. I started the firm's intranet, of course, as our own, the library's intranet. I started the knowledge management program. I built a full-text database to retrieve first the memos of law. We called them green memos. And then ultimately every significant document in the firm was retrievable with a full-text searchable database. It was wonderful. I missed that so much here. We had to develop our own catalog because initially we were using a mini computer, a DEC VAX. Fortunately, there was a company that was in Denver area who was willing to rewrite a program to run on the VAX. And they had written it really for litigation support. We adapted it a bit and ran our catalog on a litigation support database. Later, when SEMA started making her products, we purchased it. We kept, I don't know, I left out an important part. Before the catalog, or simultaneously, I converted a DBase description of a integrated library system to run on the back so that we could check in our own mail, our own serials. And we did that for several years. But for a point there, we looked at why were we taking the time to check in all these periodicals, these loose leaf releases. And some of you may remember that we stopped. I wrote about it in Trends in Law Library Management. It was great. We saved lots of time. And it was wonderful. There were no problems until West acquired Research Institute of America. At that point, they messed everything up, and we had to go back to checking in serials. Fast forward a few years, I had a great library assistant who was excited about making the most out of SEMA. He figured out a way to add table of contents and covers to the catalog. So ultimately he was able to create a virtual visual shelf list. So you could look at the shelves without having to go to the collection. Because our library had shrunk in physical size, we no longer had a reference desk, but we had a virtual reference desk. People could call or email the library, and the call or email was routed to a librarian on duty, so that not everyone was disturbed, just the person on duty. Really proud of that piece. At HRO, I proposed the first library budget before they asked me. I started billing my time before they asked me. I tried to be ahead of what they wanted. It was successful enough that they put me on the strategic planning committee the first time the firm was having a plan. I even found my boss, Steve Blackwell, for many years. And ironically, I met Steve at a CEOL conference where he was talking about what legal administrators wanted their law librarians. So about 6 months later from that conference, when we were looking for one and hadn't found one, I called him, asked if he'd be interested. He was, he came, they hired him, I got the finder's fee. It was great. Home Robertson Owen was a real challenge. I really appreciated the diversity of work that I had there.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always looking for a way to do just a bit more, to run my own business or to really do more public service. Alameda presented that opportunity. It also conveniently happened about 5 months after our daughter, who lives in the San Diego area, had a daughter. My wife said, I'd really like to be closer. So I said, okay, I'll start looking for jobs out west.
Uh-huh.
Alameda County was posted. I applied in May, hadn't heard anything, so I thought something had happened and gone ahead and filled it. But after conference in 2008, I got a call or an email from Cosette saying the board wanted to interview me. So they did. I interviewed well. I liked them. They liked me. And so I started out here in December of 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Alameda County Law Library, like any California county law library, is unique. We're funded by civil filing fees. 95% of our funding comes from that. In California, over the last 2 years, the number of civil cases filed has dropped about 20%. That means our revenue has dropped. That means we've got to find new ways of raising money, promoting the library. Anticipating that, I've been bringing people into the library in different ways. Art shows, lawyers in the library program, legal document assistant programs in the library. We have more MCLE programs. We restarted the library newsletter, first in print, and then we shifted it to social media. It's been great fun because, and the greatest thing about here as opposed to Home Robertson Owen is that whenever I actually end up being on the reference desk, which is a scary concept now actually, because I've forgotten so much. But I know even if I'm not, we are helping people with their own problems. At HRO, when partners or associates would thank me for helping them with the problem, it wasn't their problem, it was their client's problem. It had a different emotional impact.
Mm-hmm.
And that emotional connection and impact here has been very important, very rewarding. Besides, it's more like running my own business, and I get a regular paycheck.
Well, that probably makes your wife happy, especially.
Well, yeah, it certainly makes my wife happy, and I'm rather fond of regular paychecks too.
Yeah, you're not going to turn it down.
No. Now, the downside of moving out here is that in the 4 years that we've been here, I have not added 10,000 miles on my motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Colorado, I was getting more than 10,000 miles each year. Now, my best friend from high school says, now remember, Mark, that you rode your motorcycle as a stress reliever. Could it be that you are less stressed now? That's possible. I don't know. But I do miss the motorcycle rides.
This friend must not have seen the traffic out here in the Oakland area, but which I think would be a little more stressful by itself.
Well, it is, but there are some very good motorcycle rides, just 10 to 20 miles outside all this heavy traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Really awesome ones. I can share some. They're pretty good for cars, too.
Well, I know you have shared some of your bicycling to work and so on. Would you still do some of that, I guess?
Oh, yes, I still bicycle.
Because you write about it every once in a while in your column in the AELL Spectrum. And I always find those kind of interesting to read.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I found that for my columns, I wanted to have a hook.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to grab your audience with something exciting and active. And then you can go on to your message. It was, and surprisingly enough, a couple of years ago, when I was visiting Arkansas again, and went to the church, my sister is a Methodist minister,
Mm-hmm.
to hear her preach. And I realized I was following the structure of her sermons. She gives an anecdote that grabs the congregation. Then she weaves that anecdote into the scripture and the message for the day.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to do that, and because it's a way to it's a way to do it. It's a way to write that column 9 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Pat, it's strange because as I was preparing for this, I was looking at my presidential letters that were those were 10. I think we did 11 of those back then, didn't we?
One on every issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked so much harder on my column as editorial director than I did as president.
Yeah.
Perhaps because I had the time.
Well, as president, you were writing perhaps, like I did during mine, about what was happening at the time.
Yeah.
So some of it was easier. I mean, you had to still put it in writing, but the topics were easier to come up with.
There was that, certainly. Certainly there was that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had a very interesting and somewhat diverse career. I mean, you've been in law school setting, you've been in the firm for many years, and now you're here at the Alameda County Law Library. And I want to mention to our viewers that we're sitting in the conference room, actually adjacent to your office. And earlier I looked out the windows, and you know, you have the city views, the traffic and so on. And I remember one of the features that, again, I enjoy in Spectrum are the pictures that people take from their libraries of the views, and you know, the variety of those. And I thought back to your when you first joined the law firm in Denver. You said you had these spectacular views from the building that you were up in, and it must have been the inspiration, or at least in part, for this feature in the Spectrum.
I don't think I can take credit for that one. I think that one came earlier.
Well, you certainly have perpetuated it.
Well, certainly. But that's, you know, when you have something that works, you want to keep using it. But just because it has worked doesn't mean that it needs to continue working. And I think that's been one of the things that I've taken with me all the way through my career, and whether it was at the university, at the firm, or here, or anything I did at ALL, I was willing to question. One of my favorite bumper stickers remains, question authority. Just because it has worked doesn't mean it really should continue to work. And we have to remember to keep on doing that, to think about that, to analyze why are we doing it.
Well, you know, I'm sort of moving on a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things you've done for the profession more broadly than, I mean, we've already alluded to the fact that you've been the editor of the ALL Spectrum for a while, but you've had a lot of other experiences. You've already mentioned that you were president of the association at one time. In fact, you were not just president, but you were one of a relatively few that I think could be characterized as transformational presidents, and that the association needed to make some changes. And you and Kay Todd, who was right adjacent to your term, you two were very instrumental, I think, in helping to move the association forward by your choice of policies, but also by your choice of some of the personnel that were hired at that time, including Roger Parent, who I think was just he was a wonderful executive director when I was president a few years later, and beyond that.
But Roger was an outstanding executive director. I mean, thank you for the compliment. I think
it's well deserved.
I feel I took advantage of the time rather than having any, at least now having any outstanding ideas. The association was already in the midst of many things, and I was the middle of 3 law firm librarians serving as president.
That's right.
There were several special committees whose reports came through just as I was coming onto the board as vice president. We hired more staff, including a full-time newsletter editor. The association had grown in size enough so that we could afford more staff. Law firm librarians also demanded that we have more support from headquarters than academic librarians were, I think. And
Yeah,
that's
their
not-
needs were different. They didn't have the time to do all the volunteer stuff,
Mhm.
but they wanted to be involved, and that's reasonable.
We,
And a good thing, actually, too.
It is, and I'm really disheartened that it has been 20 years since we've, it hasn't been full 20 yet, has it? Since we've had another law firm president. There were many candidates, but none elected. And frankly, I fault the law firm librarians for not voting for that.
Well, they should, if they will get their act together and coordinate themselves, they all vote for the person. They ought to be able to elect them.
But they ought to be able to.
Yeah.
The association doesn't collect, track who, by library type, votes. So we can't really say for sure that the law firm librarians have not been voting. Yeah, I just have this real gut sense that they haven't. What else have I, in ALL?
Well, one thing was you served as, in Reno, when the meeting was there back in '89, you were the, in charge of the program. And that was an interesting meeting because, again, it was, we had a few staff at headquarters, but it was still the volunteers that really put it together. And
It was an amazing meeting on so many levels. You know, first because it was selected in Reno, at a place where there are or were there's one, the Washoe County Law Library.
Sandy Marsh.
Sandy Marsh,
Yeah.
who was a local arrangement chair.
yeah,
Otherwise, it was completely isolated. It was selected, and then back in summer '88, I guess, the then executive director, Bill Murphy, I think was his name, left. No, Murphy.
Bill Jepson.
Bill Jepson. Yes, it
Jepson,
was.
yeah.
It was Murphy.
Murphy was later.
Was
Yeah,
the interim
he-
director. Interim.
Mhm.
Yes. So the executive board hired a convention manager, one of our members, Margaret Lundahl.
I remember Margaret, yeah. She did several of them now.
Yeah. Now, and Margaret Leary asked me to be her program chair. And for the life of me, I don't and didn't understand why she asked me, unless she had seen my work on the Constitution and Bylaws Committee and other things related to that. And I was a law firm member, as somebody who might attract a different audience. It was an amazing program. I'm looking back at how I chose the programs and how I promoted the selection process. I can almost think that it's a precursor to the Velvet Chainsaw Report. Because in early '88, this is more than a year before the annual meeting, I published in the newsletter 19 topics that I thought would be good for the annual meeting. They weren't locked in stone, and I told people they weren't. And I asked people to contact me. And in Atlanta, the last thing said at the second business meeting, or the second large gathering, at least whatever it was, I challenged all the law firm members to give me their ideas, to tell me what they wanted to see, to come to. So I got a lot of really good program ideas. But another piece of this was I made up a new rule. I made up a rule that if you'd spoken at the annual meeting the year before, you couldn't speak at this one. I was determined to get more people involved. We've got lots of great speakers, lots of great members, and they have spoken many, many times.
Yeah.
But I also knew we had many other members who were very good, and we needed to hear new ideas.
Yeah.
Now, part of this came from another thing that I did many years before that. Just at the beginning of my career, there were 6 of us. Some of us had met at our first Connell meeting. We'd applied for committee appointments. We didn't get selected. We were so frustrated. We started a newsletter I think I wrote about it. D-U-L-L, dull, disgruntled, unhappy law librarians. Now, we never published even the first issue because we couldn't get 4 complete pages of content. And we knew we needed to have a second issue as well before it could actually go. Part of the reason we never got it finished was by the time we were about to get enough content, we got appointed to committees. It's just a matter of waiting to cycle through to get recognized.
Mhm.
That conference was, at the time, the 3rd largest in attendance. It was, I think, the first time everything was in a single hotel, a casino hotel.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Very
Instead of the
interesting.
lobby, you walked through the
Walked through
gaming
the
floor.
casino.
Yeah.
It was, I was outside only twice the almost full week I was there. Once to go to a vendor party where we were supposed to be getting hot air balloon rides, but it was too windy to do that. The other time was in the shuttle buses or cars to the rodeo arena for the opening event reception,
Mhm.
which of course itself was a bit of a brouhaha because Sandy and I weren't talking with each other about content and events because you don't need to really.
Mhm.
But I had selected a program about animal rights. Sandy had selected an event to reflect what was going on in Reno, a rodeo demo.
Mhm.
Now, we had some of our members picketing and very distressed about the rodeo and the cruelty to animals. The rodeo organizers assured us that there would be no animals injured in this event, and the PETA members agreed to simply hand out informative literature to people as they were getting on the buses to go to the event. Got to the event, I rode into the arena with Sandy Mars and the then president of Data Central, I guess at the time, in a stagecoach. Great fun, waving at people.
Mhm.
And you know, it wasn't very long into the rodeo, but during calf roping, a calf was roped, and what does it do? It gets caught and flipped, landing very hard.
Mhm.
And all gasped, or certainly I gasped. But the calf got up okay, it was seemingly uninjured. But that was a traumatic bit right there.
Mhm.
And the content, I was looking back through the program. I had some really interesting programs, some good speakers, powerful individuals. The woman from Tennessee was on the parole board who exposed a lot of vice. Courageous woman. Yeah, it was quite the event. People who attended that, I think, will still say that they had many good education programs.
It was a very good meeting, and one feature that I took advantage of, it had been recommended that, you know, if we had a little bit of time, we look around the area a little bit, and several of us went over and drove around Lake Tahoe,
Lake
which
Tahoe.
is not far, and that was fascinating to see. I'd heard a lot about it, but never seen it.
Well, that's, in terms of doing things outside the annual meeting, or outside, you know, the dome, as it
Mhm.
were. I used to do that, but I don't think I've done that since 1984.
Uh-huh.
Somehow, I got more
You
interested
got more involved in what was going on inside. huh?
inside, or more interested in the programs, or the
Yeah.
programs got better.
Well, there's some very good ones
yeah.
coming up in Seattle in
There
about
are.
3 weeks, and
Yeah.
we're doing this interview just before that meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
that
should
was
be good.
And I got Margaret Leary, of course, appointed me.
Mhm.
Elaine Blum was my co-chair, the only other member in the committee, and
Mhm.
without her, I couldn't have pulled it off. I have no idea how many program ideas I got.
Mhm.
The archive may have those records, but I selected the programs using a collection of index cards I laid on the floor of my office.
Uh-huh.
pulled it
Didn't
off.
have that process digitalized, huh?
Well, come on, this is 1988.
Well, there were a few computers
There were a few
around.
computers. I think I was the first person to bring in, outside of our accounting department, a computer. I brought in a Mac 2E so that I could begin keeping track of the library bookkeeping, so I could know where we were on budget, because accounting was taking too long. Back to my presidential years, one of the things that we did that was happening was that the internet was just at about that point.
Yeah.
We got all of the executive board to have an email address. We got headquarters staff online. Things just began snowballing. Perhaps because of technology, perhaps because of a critical size of members, perhaps because of the strategic plan and the operating plan that the board adopted, the FLIRP, the financial long-range plan. All these things came together in ways, and at the time, that just clicked. And yeah, when Judy announced her retirement, I had to figure out a way with the board to get a successor. We selected a committee that included executive board members and other members from the association, because I wanted to be sure there was as diverse a representation as possible. And as we should note, that one of the people on that selection committee later became president, Carol Avery Nicholson. Whether because she had that exposure or not, I don't know, but Roger was a very good choice. Using a search firm was a very wise choice. And I have used a search firm now here at Alameda, and it's a tremendous saving. I encourage everyone to use a search firm. We've got more important things to do than screen candidates. After all, we tell lawyers to come to us for research because we're the experts. We shouldn't be trying to be experts at everything either. That's litigator talk.
Well, it sounds like you have had a lot of fun experiences over the years. You've done a lot as well for us as a profession and for the various places where you work. And I guess that is what we all hope in our career. Perhaps as we near the end of the interview, I should give you an opportunity if there's anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention.
Well, I've got to go back to another AALL event.
Okay.
And with that also honor Al, because he taught me that professionalism is finding ways to give back. Now I can also cast some of this back to my American Baptist upbringing in Kansas. But those two things really shaped my commitment to service. The other piece of my activity that I'm most pleased with was in 1988, when I was co-chair of the Constitution and Bylaws Committee. We had drafted an amendment for the bylaws to implement a straw poll that the membership committee had done. Because of the amendment requirements, the proposal failed to pass because it didn't get the 2/3 requirement to pass. But it failed by 10 votes. Everybody wanted a change, just not enough there to complete the change. I figured out a way for us to revisit that decision, propose a compromise that the membership adopted. So it was so much fun playing Robert's Rules of Order to script that out. It's been great fun. And casting to another, at HRO, I went out and sought work as a library consultant, consulting for other law firms, and resulted in hiring one law librarian in a law firm in Las Vegas. Outside of those two positions, I served as the editor for Trends in Law Library Management, which was also a great experience. In Colorado, I was a member of the Colorado Library Marketing Council. group of librarians formed after the Colorado Library Conference as a precursor to the White House Conference in 1990, I guess it was. We sought and received an LSTA grant for a marketing workshop for librarians. That was a two-part workshop. First, a face-to-face workshop that gave the participants homework, a marketing project. Then they came back a month, 6 weeks later, and they presented their project. So it was really far ahead of its time. That was great. I was also chair of the Colorado Library Resource Sharing and Information Access Board, a group formed also after the library conference. And our largest task was to negotiate statewide contracts for databases. We negotiated with OCLC for a search contract for all public libraries and academic libraries in the state. There couldn't be any law firm libraries included in it. More recently, when we moved out here, I've gotten involved with a local group, BayNet, which is a collection of libraries of all different types, academic, special, law, school. It's a way to cross-pollinate libraries. It's very effective, just a real kick. I had Roberta Schaefer speak to the group before she became the Associate Librarian of Congress, while she was still the librarian, the Law Librarian of Congress. What else? Give me a pause to check my notes. What else I wanted to be sure to mention?
Yeah, go ahead.
There
Off camera, I'll just mention you have an iPad and a little stand, and very high tech.
When I was president, I had to be high tech.
Yeah.
Because I was traveling all the time and found that I could actually write and edit my pieces on my MacBook Pro.
Yeah. We all learned how to do that, and this morning I read my hometown newspaper on my iPad. It's very interesting what you can do with these things.
It is, but I found though that I went, in terms of editing my editor's columns for Spectrum, I went back to paper.
Oh.
Because I'd lost the skill of working, or else perhaps it was as you suggested that there was different content, so I had to treat it differently. It was fun to be on the Library Journal cover in July of '97. That was great. I've been especially pleased about how I have consistently promoted Rangan Nathan's fourth law of library science: save the reader time. Customer service is what we have to be most focused about.
Yeah. Well, especially in the setting you're in now with the county library. I mean, people come in are basically trying to research their own cases.
They are.
We need a lot of assistance.
A lot of assistance. One of the greatest things that is not law library, but it is librarianship. After the '96 Olympics, my wife Beth was looking for something to do, and I ironically had become involved with reforming the DU Library School. I was on the advisory committee for that. I attended a class on the psychology of information-seeking behavior. The professor and the class just rocked. It was what we didn't have when I was in library school. It made everything click. I persuaded her to go to library school. She graduated, worked in the Denver Public School Libraries and Douglas County Libraries, got a job at San Jose State University School of Library and Information Science. So she is now teaching library students, librarians. So I feel like I have multiplied way beyond AALL into other places. And it's very gratifying to do that. Yeah, it's been good.
That's great. Well, I certainly appreciate your time, Mark, this morning, and or actually now it's early afternoon.
Now it's early afternoon.
I mean, our viewers won't know, but I'll tell them. Should I mention how hot it is in California these days?
Yeah.
We're
Right
having
now
a heat
here.
wave, although
Yeah.
it's pleasant here in Oakland compared to Sacramento, where I drove through yesterday, and it was about 25 degrees hotter there.
Yes,
But,
yes,
I
yes.
imagine a number of our viewers will appreciate those differences.
Those differences, yes, indeed.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again, and we'll go ahead and close the interview then.
Now, wait a minute. You're going to ask me if there's anything else I wanted to.
Well, I did
Yeah.
once. Is there anything else?
Yeah,
You were
really-
checking your notes.
Yes, yes. Well, yes, recruiting others to librarianship is big.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also real pleased, and I want to encourage people to say you're welcome rather than no problem when someone thanks you.
Mm-hmm.
You want to honor their request. When you attend a meeting of any sort, and if you're given a name tag, put it where they can see it. Put it here,
Yeah.
because you attend a meeting for networking purposes. So you can meet people, you can connect with people, you can learn their name, they can learn your name. Do that. Learn how to talk about what you do and who you are in those settings. Now, I don't know whether I've been improved in my delivery of law librarianship compared to how Carolyn Ahern described it back in 1988, where she said people's eyes glazed over. When I tell people I'm the law library director of Alameda County, they don't. They say, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And it is great. And what we do is great. And we should all remember that. Thanks.